So the 100th episode of R&B Money Podcast with Tank and Jay Valentine recently came out, and rightfully so, the guest for this big accomplishment was none other than Chris Brown. And during their conversation, they talked about a very important concept that I kind of touched on in the previous video, which was owning your masters. And it seems like the last handful of years, across all genres from rap, pop, R&B, it seems like primarily black artists, and with us paying attention, it seems like mainly black artists earning their masters has become a bigger deal and a bigger trend that, granted, has been done before by Prince, Michael Jackson, and the like. But again, I think it's something that we don't quite understand, and we don't necessarily understand like why it's such a big accomplishment. So in the music industry, your masters or masters recordings are basically the original version of whatever music that you make. Any streaming platform that you're using, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube's music streaming app, Tidal, the list goes on, Pandora. All of these different companies use usually the original versions of music. Those would be the master recordings. Another way to say the masters, like when people say they got their masters, they're saying they earned the publishing rights or they have acquired the publishing rights to their own music. So in other words, when they manage to accomplish that, what they're saying when they get the publishing rights is they now have basically 110% control over how the music is used, when it's used, and why it's used. And therefore, all the money that comes from whatever venture, like say an advertisement, like a TV ad, whatever money that ad generates by using your song, you get a cut of it. It doesn't go to the label at all. It goes directly to the artist. But a bit more on why this is actually a pretty big deal. So just from basic research, the majority of deals that happen when an artist signs with a bigger label, a major record label, they get a whole lot. And I might dive into this in a deeper video. But one of the things that makes contracts in, I want to say primarily the entertainment industry, but especially music, very different is that by you signing that contract, you're automatically walking into a whole lot of benefits. But you have to understand that with contracts in any type of legally binding situation, those agreements are never really supposed to be one-sided in that one party benefits and the other does not at all. There has to be some trade-off to where both parties walk away happy. That's usually the idea of negotiation. With that said, if an artist walks into a major deal with a record label and through that they automatically get money that they're supposed to use for something, but a lot of it, a lot of artists mishandle it because the fact of the matter is that money can go towards anything. That's why a lot of them do it to spruce up their lifestyle. But again, that's something else I might dive more into. But as a musician or as an entertainer of whatever kind, and you sign that type of contract, you're usually walking into a whole lot of benefits. Again, financial stuff. You may walk into I would say arguably the biggest benefit is that you're walking into a gigantic network of people that if you stick around long enough and take advantage of that time, you'll get people on your side or you can connect with people that will help you do things, when you want to branch out and maybe diversify, you probably will come across a whole bunch of people that will be able to give you information or will become business partners, stuff like that. It also gives you the opportunity to establish your own professional network so that if and when you eventually part ways with a major label who has access to that network, you'll be able to get around just fine without them. And there's a lot more to this, marketing, branding, and all the other stuff. But basically, you walk into a good amount of benefits when you sign that type of deal. At least that's the idea. But that's on the favor of the artist. So what is in the benefit of the record label? And that's where the masters come in. The masters basically ensure long-term revenue from that money or from that music whenever it's used, assuming the music is worth anything and people pay attention to it. This type of situation is obviously prevalent with newer artists that, again, if they're coming from a certain background or if they've just been working on this in general, and more times than not, money's on the front of their mind. So as long as the contract says, we'll give you $1 million to sign with us and to join the roster, most people aren't looking too much past that, right? This is why I like to look at people like Nipsey Hussle. He did sign, to my knowledge, 2 major record label deals. The first one was with Epic when he was like really brand new, but it just wasn't a good deal. And he also had legal issues at the time. But when it came to Atlantic, which was his second one not long before he unfortunately passed away, he said it was more of a partnership because he was an independent artist that established his own brand, his own audience. He had a national, if not maybe international reach, not as big as other artists, but he was known. Like before people knew him, mainly because of his demise, He had been worked with Rick Ross. He had been worked with a bunch of other big name artists, Dom Kennedy and other people who are very popular and reputable in the rap industry. Not everyone knows these people, but they all have their own circles and they get along well with each other. But also again, like bigger names, they usually are familiar in those spaces as well. So since he was already making those type of moves by himself, it wasn't a matter of getting him off the ground. He got himself off the ground. What made Nip's situation different and why his deal with Atlantic was able to be more of a partnership, and therefore he retained the rights to his music, because even after he passed, whenever we play his music, the money doesn't go to the label at all. It goes to his family, Lauren London and their kids. So the difference with that was he didn't need to walk into a deal where he had absolutely nothing, and now the label's going to be responsible for giving him everything. I don't know the intricacies of the deal, but I know those were some of the details that he spoke about, which was he took the slow route or took the stairs when it came to building up his brand with his career. He had then made money and did a bunch of stuff, but he took the stairs in terms of popularity. And he said that he did that because when it was time to negotiate his deal with Atlantic, it was more on equal footing. It wasn't Atlantic being on top and saying, we're going to give you this, and this. You have to give us this, which might screw you out some money in the long term, the short term, whatever the case is, versus he now has built a catalog of well over 10 projects, but before he even signed that deal, made a good amount of money, built up his fan base, it was organic, all that stuff. So he doesn't necessarily need all that stuff, or he doesn't need it to the same degree. So he's able to play with it a bit more. That, and he had a better understanding of a lot of this business stuff compared to a whole lot of artists that usually just jump right into it. And they usually, through the whole complaints that they publicize of don't sign this deal, don't sign with this producer, and that's usually when they start to learn from those mistakes. Jumping back to the R&B Money podcast part of it, one of the things that Jay Valentine said was a lot of new artists try to get into the game without really building up their brand first and getting people to know who they are and proving that they are consistent with the quality of their music. And they try to come out the gate saying they want to own their masters, but they don't even know what that means, and they don't know why they have to really earn that from the record label in the first place. And this goes back to what I just said earlier, in that as a newer artist, I'm talking like new to the point where no one knows you. You're still like double XL freshman new, like that type of new. A lot of those artists haven't built themselves up yet, and most people don't know them. So when they try to get these deals, or when they manage to sign these deals, the record label is offering them a whole lot. But again, contracts are usually meant to be a two-way street. It's not usually meant for just one person to be happy and the other person is just supposed to be, down bad the entire time. That's a terrible deal that no one should ever think about signing, right? So when it comes to Jay Valentine's statement and why a lot of people should not have their masters out the gate and it takes time to build themselves up to actually earn that, there's a few different reasons for this, but we're going to focus on the avenue of money here. The whole thing with owning your masters is you, one, prove that through longevity, through a certain number of time, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which in Chris Brown's case, he's been in this industry for, I think, around the area of 20 years now, if not longer. So he's more than built himself up. Everyone has known him basically ever since he initially blew up. He's been very consistent with the quality of his music. Socially, he's had his hiccups, and I know people have mixed feelings about it. But in terms of his music, his art, what he's paid for through and through, he's been consistent basically his entire career. He's never had like a single project that did not have 1, 2 bangers that we still go back to this day, and everyone will chant every single lyric of almost every song he drops, right? So his catalog, the entire group of his music, is very valuable, and the record label knows this. Now, whenever his music has been played for ads and other third parties, the money normally wouldn't go to Chris Brown, or at least not the majority of it. The majority of it would go to the label. That's their benefit for the contract that they signed with you or that you signed with them, right? The other side of it, it helps the record label, at least from my perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if it helps the record label win both in the short and long term, because if they own your masters, and let's say you don't end up lasting longer than like 5 years in the entertainment industry as a whole, but primarily with music, they only got a decent amount of money out of you for those 4 or 5 years, maybe a tad longer, because maybe you have 1 or 2 classic songs that, like, I'm talking Cupid Shuffle, Wobble type stuff, like almost no matter, it almost don't matter how much time passes, people are going to play this song as like the black family parties and the group functions and all that stuff. Like these are just classic songs. But maybe the rest of your music just hasn't made that much of a movement. So, in general, maybe those first few years when it comes to your record sales, again, that money, the majority of it will usually go to the record label. Only a little bit would go to you. But they may have won in the short term because they gave you a whole bunch of stuff and they got their money back through the, I guess, royalties of owning your masters. But if you didn't really turn out to be a consistent decade or 2 decade long legend, well, they won in the short term and eventually y'all separate and it is what it is. Versus a more Chris Brown, Rihanna, Hove, and B, those type of people, those situations benefit the record label, I think, short and long term. Because the same thing applies in the short term in that the better your music does, as long as the label owns the masters, the majority of the money goes to them. But then if you eventually build yourself up enough to the point where you can actually start bidding for your own masters, I believe you have to purchase them outright. I may have to do a little more research in that, but I believe you can literally purchase your masters just through and through as long as you have the money for it, right? So I'm sure there's more into this, but I'm sure one option is, hey, I want to buy my masters. How much would it be for a lump sum payment? Just one big old cash payment. And once they get that dollar amount, you just drop that dollar amount and you have the masters. I think this is something else I want to look into a bit more, but I'm curious at how much this information is actually public, but I'll do my research and figure it out. If this is something you guys want me to focus in on when it comes to this, let me know. But from the outside looking in and from the little bit of research I've done, this is the type of information I've come across. So that's what makes owning your masters important. The masters determine, if someone wants to borrow your music for a sample or for an advertisement or anything like that, it determines who they get in touch with. Now that Chris Brown owns his masters, if these other companies want to use his music or sample his music, he's the one that ultimately gives the yes or no. Before, it was his label that had to give the yes or no. That also means the majority of the money from these people borrowing his music or his art would go to him, if not completely, versus the majority of it was going to the label before. So those are some just the basic details of what makes owning your masters in music very important, and also why a lot of people more and more throughout the years are saying stick to being independent. Yeah, you may not be the most popular, but what matters is the money and the financial split, right? And so if you are signed to a major record label, but the mass majority of your money is going to the label because they own the masters, versus if you're independent and you maybe do shows where you only have like, let's call it 10,000 people, in a show, which to most people really ain't that crazy. But if you manage to do that and charge every person, let's say on the low end, $5 to see your show, right? You're gonna have to split the money with the venue and stuff like that, but the big number would be 50,000. If you manage to get into a venue that's relatively small, it's only 10,000 people, and you only charge them $5 for a ticket to do the show, you're a relatively unknown artist in terms of like being an A-lister and all that stuff, but you just cleared 50,000 a show. You give the venue however much, the rest of that money stays with you and your team. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that the venue takes 10,000 off the top. That leaves you with 40,000. You know what I'm saying? If your team is like, maybe you're the artist, you got one of your homeboys that's the main producer or something like that, and maybe one of your homeboys that's the writer, or maybe the marketing guy, and you handle writing and some other stuff. That's a 3-person operation. You split it 3 ways. That's a little more than 10K per person, So it's still like a good hustle to have. And if you was to knock out that type of math so much as 10 times a year, you're a 6-figure earner as an individual. Now imagine if you were somehow a one-man operation covering all these different bases independently and still making that much money. You're seeing a whole lot of money. You know what I'm saying? So that's why, yeah, you may not be the most popular. Who knows you? It's not always about, who knows who. I mean, networking is always important, but in terms of popularity, just because someone's more popular don't mean they're automatically getting more money. Because if they're more popular, especially if they're a major artist, that usually means that there are more hands in their pocket. The hard part with being independent is that there's less people in your pocket, more money comes to you, but that also means you have to do more work. And it may take longer for you to reach a decent level. You can have a 20-year-long rap career that was super lucrative. You're probably richer than the majority of A-list celebrities, but the most people don't know you, except for behind like closed doors. Like maybe you're known as a writer, you might be known as a producer, but when it comes to your own raps and your own music, people may not know you. That might be a hit, but financially, and maybe with other accolades, you're probably going to be so much further ahead than the people whose face and name are well known. So I think it's a matter of priority when it comes down to it. But bottom line, that's what it means to own your masters. That's why some people make the argument of going major versus independent, and the benefits of it and all that stuff. I think I want to look into this a bit more. Let me know if you guys want me to. Let me know in the comment section below if this is something I should look more into. If you have any information to share with this subject, that would be helpful as well. But I'm going to go ahead and leave the video off here. If you have any feedback for me, leave that for me in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.